What if I told you that a mathematician with zero Wall Street experience built a hedge fund that returned 66% annually for 30 years straight? Not 66% total. 66% every single year. That means if you invested just $100 with this man in 1988, by 2018 you would have over $2 million. This performance crushes Warren Buffett. It destroys George Soros. It makes every other legendary investor look like an amateur. This is the absolutely mind-blowing true story of Jim Simons, the man who solved the market. Before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button because this story will change how you think about success, mathematics, and the power of thinking differently. Our story begins on April 25, 1938, in Newton, Massachusetts. Jim Simons was born into a middle-class Jewish family. His father owned a shoe factory, and his mother was a homemaker. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would become one of the wealthiest people on earth. But there was one thing that set young Jim apart. He was obsessed with mathematics. From an early age, Jim showed an extraordinary talent for numbers and patterns. While other kids played outside, Jim was lost in mathematical puzzles. His parents recognized his gift and encouraged his intellectual curiosity. They understood they had something special on their hands. By the time Jim reached high school, his mathematical abilities were undeniable. He wasn't just good at math. He saw the world through mathematical patterns that others couldn't perceive. At age 17, Jim entered the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And here's where the story gets interesting. Most students take 4 years to complete their undergraduate degree. Jim finished his bachelor's degree in mathematics in just 3 years. He graduated from MIT in 1958 at age 20. But Jim wasn't done pushing boundaries. After graduating from MIT, Jim did something completely unexpected. He and a friend decided to ride motor scooters from Boston all the way to Bogota, Colombia. This wasn't a normal road trip. They were traveling through Central America in the late 1950s on scooters. When they needed a place to sleep, they would sometimes ask local police if they could stay in jail cells for safety. And surprisingly, the police often agreed. This adventure tells you everything you need to know about Jim Simons. He wasn't afraid to take unconventional paths. After his adventure, Jim enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley to pursue his PhD in mathematics. His thesis advisor was a renowned mathematician named Bertram Constant. Now, most PhD students take 5 to 7 years to complete their doctorate. Jim finished his PhD in mathematics in 1961 at the age of 23. His doctoral thesis provided a groundbreaking new proof in differential geometry that had stumped other mathematicians for years. His advisor was actually skeptical that Jim could solve this problem, but Jim proved him wrong. At 23 years old, Jim Simons had a PhD from Berkeley and was already making waves in the mathematics community. He started teaching at MIT as a Moore instructor. His career seemed set. He would be a brilliant academic mathematician, publish papers, teach students, and live a comfortable university life. But Jim's path was about to take several unexpected turns. In 1964, Jim made a decision that would change everything. He joined the Institute for Defense Analysis in Princeton, New Jersey. This was a federally funded organization that worked on classified projects for the government. Jim became a codebreaker for the National Security Agency during the Cold War. His job was to crack encrypted Soviet communications. The work was fascinating, and it doubled his academic salary, which was important because Jim had started a family and had financial obligations. But Jim's time at the IDA taught him something crucial. As a codebreaker, he learned to find hidden patterns in seemingly random data. He learned to use mathematics to extract meaningful signals from noise. He learned that with the right mathematical models, you could predict things that seemed unpredictable. This experience would later become the foundation of his investing philosophy. However, Jim's time at the IDA came to an abrupt end in 1968. The Vietnam War was raging, and Jim was strongly opposed to it. In 1967, he wrote a letter to the New York Times expressing his opposition to the war. Then he told a Newsweek reporter that he would stop working on Defense Department projects until the war ended. For someone working at a Defense Department-funded organization, this was career suicide. Jim was fired. But being fired turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to him. Almost immediately, Jim received an offer to become the chair of the mathematics department at Stony Brook University, part of the State University of New York system. The department was relatively new and had potential, but it wasn't prestigious yet. Jim saw this as an opportunity. For the next 10 years, from 1968 to 1978, Jim built Stony Brook's mathematics department from the ground up. He recruited talented mathematicians. He created a culture of excellence. He transformed an unknown department into one with a distinguished reputation. During his time at Stony Brook, Jim also met someone who would change his life. Her name was Marilyn Harris, and she was a student studying economics. They fell in love, and they married in 1977. Marilyn shared Jim's love of science and learning. She would later earn her own doctorate in economics from Stony Brook in 1984. Their partnership would become one of the most important relationships in Jim's life. But the most important thing that happened during Jim's time at Stony Brook was his collaboration with another mathematician. In the early 1970s, Jim began working with Shen Chern, a legendary mathematician. Together, they published a paper in 1974 that introduced something called Chern-Simons invariance. At the time, this was pure theoretical mathematics. They had no idea it would have any practical application. But years later, their work became fundamental to string theory, quantum field theory, and condensed matter physics. Jim would later say that his collaboration with Chern was the high point of his mathematical career. In 1976, Jim received the Oswald Veblen Prize from the American Mathematical Society, one of the most prestigious awards in mathematics. He was at the peak of his academic career. He had job security, respect, and a comfortable life. But Jim was restless. He had always been interested in business and finance. During his time at Barclay, he had traded stocks and dabbled in commodity futures. He was always looking for investment opportunities, and he started to wonder if he could apply his mathematical knowledge to the financial markets. In 1978, at age 40, Jim made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He left his tenure position at Stony Brook to start a hedge fund. Keep in mind, Jim had zero experience in professional finance. He had never worked on Wall Street. He had never managed money for other people. He was a pure mathematician, an academic. But he believed that financial markets had hidden patterns, just like the codes he had cracked for the NSA. He believed that with the right mathematical models, he could predict price movements and make consistent profits. Jim started his firm in a small office in a strip mall on Long Island. He called it Mathematician. The firm primarily traded currencies. And here's the thing. At first, Jim didn't even use advanced mathematics. He was trading based on fundamental analysis and technical indicators like everyone else, and it worked okay. He made some money, but Jim gradually realized that this wasn't the right approach. If he was going to succeed, he needed to fully embrace what he knew best, mathematics. So Jim started recruiting. But he didn't recruit people from Wall Street. He didn't hire MBA graduates or experienced traders. Instead, he went after mathematicians, physicists, computer scientists, and codebreakers, people from his old world. His first recruit was Leonard Baum, a cryptanalyst from the IDA who had co-authored an important algorithm. Jim wanted people who could build mathematical models to find patterns in market data. In 1982, Jim renamed his firm Renaissance Technologies. The name represented a rebirth, a new approach to investing based on science rather than intuition. Renaissance started building models to analyze historical price data. They were looking for correlations and patterns that could be exploited. They were doing something that almost nobody else was doing at the time. They were using quantitative analysis, computer algorithms, and statistical methods to make trading decisions. But the early years were rough. Jim and his team struggled to create models that worked consistently. They had some successes and some failures. In the mid-1980s, Jim brought in an algebraist named James Axe from Cornell University. Together, they started working on more sophisticated models. In 1988, they launched a new fund. They named it the Medallion Fund after the prestigious math awards that both Jim and James had won. The Medallion Fund was different from anything else in finance. It was completely systematic. There were no gut feelings, no hunches, no emotional decisions. Everything was based on mathematical models and algorithms. The computer would identify trading opportunities based on statistical patterns, and the trades would be executed automatically. This was revolutionary for the late 1980s. But then, disaster struck. In 1989, the Medallion Fund lost about 30% from its peak. This was a crushing blow. James Axe insisted that his models had accounted for this possibility, and they should keep trading. But Jim wasn't convinced. As the majority owner, Jim made the tough decision to pause and reevaluate everything. This caused a rift, and James Axe left the firm. Jim needed help. He reached out to Elwyn Berlekamp, a Berkeley professor who was also a consultant and brilliant mathematician. Berlekamp had worked at the IDA, where Jim first met him. Berlekamp agreed to help. He worked with Jim and other team members, including Sander Strauss and Henry Laufer, to completely overhaul Medallion's trading system. They spent 6 months rebuilding everything from the ground up. In 1990, Berlekamp led the Medallion Fund to a 55.9% gain after fees. 55.9% in 1 year. This wasn't luck. This was the system working. The mathematical models had found something real. After that success, Berlekamp returned to his teaching duties at Berkeley. He sold his stake back to Jim at 6 times what he had paid for it just 16 months earlier. Sander Strauss then took over running the revamped trading system. And then the magic really started happening. In 1991, Medallion returned 39.4% after fees. In 1992, it returned 34%. In 1993, it returned 39.1%. Year after year, the returns were extraordinary. And this wasn't just a lucky streak. The Medallion Fund would go on to average 66% annual returns before fees for the next 30 years. After fees, which were substantial, the fund still averaged 39% per year. Let me put this in perspective. From 1988 to 2018, the Medallion Fund generated over $100 billion in trading profits. Between 1993 and 2005, the fund had only 17 losing months out of more than 140 months. It had only 3 losing quarters out of 49 quarters. In 2008, when the global financial crisis caused the S&P 500 to lose 38.5%, the Medallion Fund gained 98.2%. In 2020, while many investors struggled with pandemic volatility, Medallion surged 76%. The performance was so consistent and so incredible that after the Bernie Madoff scandal in 2008, the SEC came to investigate Renaissance. They wanted to know if it was real or another Ponzi scheme. Jim later joked about this at an MIT event. He said they studied us thoroughly, and of course they didn't find anything because it was completely legitimate. So how did they do it? How did Jim Simons and his team achieve returns that no one else in history has matched? The exact strategies are a closely guarded secret. Employees at Renaissance signed strict non-disclosure agreements. Many employees don't even know the full picture, only their specific piece of the puzzle. But we do know some things. First, Renaissance used massive amounts of data. We're talking about petabytes of data. They didn't just look at stock prices. They looked at everything: weather patterns, news events, economic indicators, social trends, anything that could potentially correlate with price movements. They cast an incredibly wide net. Second, they used sophisticated mathematical models to find statistical patterns and anomalies in this data. They were looking for what they called tradable effects. These were patterns that appeared repeatedly and could be exploited for profit. Many of these patterns were based on mean reversion. Prices tend to bounce back after moving too far in one direction. Renaissance was profiting from how other people reacted to prices. Third, they used high leverage and very short holding periods. Most of their trades lasted from a few minutes to a few days. They were making thousands of trades per day across multiple markets. They were trading stocks, bonds, currencies, commodities, everything. The individual profit on each trade was tiny, but when you make thousands of profitable trades per day, it adds up dramatically. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, Jim built an incredible team. He didn't hire Wall Street people. He hired scientists, physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, people who could think in algorithms and probabilities. In the 1990s, he recruited Peter Brown and Robert Mercer, two brilliant mathematicians who had been working on speech recognition and machine translation at IBM's Research Center. These two would eventually become co-CEOs of Renaissance after Jim retired. Renaissance Technologies currently has about 300 employees. Of those, 90 are PhD-level researchers in math, physics, computer science, and related fields. This is not a normal hedge fund. It's more like a research laboratory that happens to trade financial instruments. By the 2000s, the Medallion Fund had become so successful that Jim made a critical decision. In 1993, the fund had stopped taking new outside investors. Then, in 2005, Renaissance bought out the last remaining outside investors. The Medallion Fund became exclusively for Renaissance employees and their families. Why would they close the fund? Because there's only so much profit you can extract from market inefficiencies. If the fund got too big, the strategies would stop working as well. By keeping it small and internal, they could maximize returns. But Renaissance does run other funds that are open to outside investors. The Renaissance Institutional Equities Fund, the Renaissance Institutional Diversified Alpha, and the Renaissance Institutional Diversified Global Equity Fund. These funds manage about $55 billion in assets. However, their performance is nowhere near Medallion's level. In 2020, while Medallion gained 76%, the public funds actually lost money. This disparity is shocking and highlights that Medallion's success is based on strategies that only work at a certain scale. Jim Simons officially retired as CEO of Renaissance in 2010, though he remained as non-executive chairman until 2021. Peter Brown and Robert Mercer took over as co-CEOs. Even in retirement, Jim remained heavily invested in the Medallion Fund. By the time of his death in May 2024, Jim's net worth was estimated at $31.4 billion, making him the 55th richest person in the world. But here's what makes Jim Simons truly remarkable. He didn't just accumulate wealth. He gave most of it away. In 1994, Jim and Marilyn founded the Simons Foundation to support research in mathematics and fundamental sciences. The foundation has donated over $4 billion to various causes. In 2023 alone, the Simons Foundation gave $500 million to Stony Brook University, the second largest donation to a public university in U.S. history. The foundation established the Flatiron Institute in New York City, which houses over 300 computational scientists working on biology, astrophysics, quantum mechanics, mathematics, and neuroscience. They created Math for America, a program to improve mathematics education by recruiting and supporting high-quality math teachers. They funded autism research since Jim and Marilyn lost their daughter to a developmental disorder. Jim also remained deeply connected to the universities that shaped him. He was a major benefactor of MIT and Berkeley. In 2012, the Simons Foundation pledged $60 million to Berkeley to establish the Simons Institute for the Theory of Computing, now the world's leading institute for collaborative research and theoretical computer science. The foundation has since donated additional tens of millions to support the institute. Perhaps the most touching tribute to Jim Simons is this. In 2016, the International Astronomical Union named an asteroid after him. Asteroid 6618 Jim Simons, discovered in 1936, was named in honor of his contributions to mathematics and philanthropy. So what can we learn from the incredible life of Jim Simons? First, expertise in one field can transfer to completely different domains if you're willing to think creatively. Jim used pattern recognition skills from codebreaking and mathematical modeling from academia to revolutionize finance. Second, being different is an advantage. Every other hedge fund was hiring MBA graduates and Wall Street veterans. Jim hired physicists and mathematicians. He built models while everyone else relied on intuition. He succeeded because he approached the problem differently than everyone else. Third, building the right team is everything. Jim's success wasn't just about his own genius. It was about recruiting brilliant people, creating a collaborative culture, and empowering his team to innovate. Renaissance Technologies is as much a story about talent management as it is about mathematics. Fourth, data and systematic approaches beat intuition and emotion. The Medallion Fund succeeded because it removed human emotion from trading decisions. The models didn't panic during crashes. They didn't get greedy during bubbles. They just executed based on probabilities. Fifth, you can restart your career at any age. Jim left academia at 40 to start a hedge fund with zero finance experience. He could have stayed comfortable at Stony Brook until retirement. Instead, he took a massive risk, and it paid off beyond anyone's imagination. And finally, true success includes giving back. Jim didn't just accumulate wealth. He used his fortune to advance human knowledge. He supported mathematics education. He funded basic scientific research. He improved the world with his resources. Jim Simons passed away on May 10th, 2024, at the age of 86. But his legacy lives on. Renaissance Technologies continues to operate successfully under the leadership of Peter Brown. The Simons Foundation continues to fund groundbreaking research. And the mathematical and scientific discoveries that Jim supported will benefit humanity for generations. In the end, Jim Simons proved something remarkable. He showed that the deepest mathematical theories, the ones that seem completely abstract and useless, can have profound real-world applications. His work with Sheng-Shen Chern on differential geometry influenced theoretical physics decades later. His code-breaking skills from the Cold War helped him find patterns in financial markets. His pure love of mathematics led him to build the most successful investment vehicle in history. When asked to summarize his life, Jim once said, "I did a lot of math. I made a lot of money, and I gave almost all of it away. That's the story of my life." But it was so much more than that. Jim Simons showed us that intellectual curiosity, rigorous thinking, and the courage to forge your own path can lead to extraordinary places.